Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Masayoshi Hamada, former Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs and member of the House of Councillors of Japan. 浜田さん、本日はようこそいらっしゃいました。レクチャーとても楽しみにしています。My name is Tetsuya Yamada. I was born and raised in Okazaki City, and I am on exchange to the Chinese University of Hong Kong from the Department of International Studies at Nagoya University of Commerce and Business. Here, at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, I am completing the second year of my undergraduate studies. The Chinese University is truly an international campus. Numerous lectures and symposia from eminent scholars and world leaders have come to lecture at CUHK. Today's lecture by Mr. Masayoshi Hamada is one of the series of lectures by famous diplomats, including diplomats from the mainland China, USA, Germany, France, Italy, Korea, Japan, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, may I invite Professor Lawrence Lau, Vice Chancellor and President of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, to give his welcoming address. Professor Lau, please.
Mr. Masayoshi Hamada, distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all and welcome to the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Today, we are most honored and privileged to have with us as our distinguished speaker, Mr. Masayoshi Hamada, former Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Japan. Mr. Hamada is also a member of the new Komeito Party, Kuomintang, in the House of Councillors in Japan. I'm extremely grateful to him for coming to our campus. Actually, he's only going to be here for one day. He came especially to give the lecture to us, to our campus to share his wisdom and wealth of experience with our faculty and students. As you know, the new Komeito Party is affiliated with Soka Gakkai, and one of the leaders of which is Dr. Daisaku Ikeda. Dr. Ikeda is the president of Soka Gakkai International and is also an honorary alumnus of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Born in Osaka, Mr. Hamada graduated from the Faculty of Engineering at Kyoto University in 1979 and joined the Ministry of International Trade and Industry in 1980. In the ensuing 3 decades, he worked for different divisions of the ministry, holding such important positions as Director of the Standardization and Planning Office, Director of the Chemical Safety Office, and Director of the Biochemical Industry Division. He was involved in the development of barrier-free housing, policies for new industries such as bioindustries and electronic materials, and recycling and environmental measures. During the period, he was posted to the Japan External Trade Organization office in Geneva for 3 years from 1995. He also served as acting director of the New Energy and Industrial Technology Department organization in 2000. In 2003, Mr. Hamada left the Ministry of International Trade and Industry and was elected a member of the House of Councillors in 2004. This is the upper house of the Japanese Parliament. He was appointed Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs in 2006 and became Director of the Committee on Foreign Affairs under the Policy Research Council of the new Komeito Party a year later. Currently, he is the Vice Director General of the Policy Research Council of the House of Councillors. Mr. Hamada holds several positions in the House of Councillors. He is a member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs and Defense, the Special Committee on Official Development Assistance, and the Special Committee on Administrative Reform. He is also Director of the Committee on Oversight of Administration. In the new Komeito Party, he's the Chief of the Secretariat of the Headquarters for Rejuvenating Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises and head of the project team for Asian economic strategy, as well as the project team for reviewing the status of finance policy. A veteran diplomat who has worked for the Japanese Ministry of International Trade and Industry for close to 3 decades, and who acquired extensive experience in international relations, Mr. Hamada is going to talk to us today on peace building towards a nuclear weapons-free world, working with the citizens of the world. You will recall that a summit chaired by the U.S. President Barack Obama on 24 September, at this summit, the UN Security Council unanimously approved a resolution calling for an end to the proliferation of nuclear weapons. I'm sure you can't wait to be enlightened by Mr. Hamada on this very important subject. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in warmly welcoming Mr. Masayoshi Hamada.
President Lawrence Lau, distinguished professors and scholars, and ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor to be here to lecture at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. First of all, I must express my gratitude to Professor Lau for giving me such a wonderful opportunity, and at the same time, congratulate former President Professor Charles Kao on receiving the Nobel Prize in Physics. Today, I'd like to talk about peace building, a process to which I am devoted, particularly peace building toward a nuclear weapons-free world. I would like to invite all the citizens of the world to work together toward this end. Before starting my lecture, I'd like to give a little background on myself. As Professor Lau introduced me, until 2 years ago, I was Vice Minister for Japanese Foreign Affairs. It was during this time that I first met President Lau, who was visiting Japan. In my office, we talked about a variety of topics, such as my political party, peace building, economic policy on Japan, and prospects for Hong Kong economy. This talk was very stimulating due to the experience I had been working in the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, now Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, for 23 years before entering the world of politics. When I wrote to Professor Lau about my resignation from my position as Vice Minister 2 years ago, he replied that since you are leaving your position, you will have time to come to the Chinese University of Hong Kong to deliver a lecture. Since I did not have the knowledge needed to deliver a lecture in front of such leading the figure in economics, this put me in an awkward position. I finally answered by saying that although the task of giving a lecture on the economy is quite beyond me, I might be able to share some of my thoughts on the topics of my aspiration to engage in international peace building, which is why I am here. Another reason is a wonderful relationship with Chinese University of Hong Kong. First of all, Dr. Daisaku Ikeda, the founder of the new Komeito Party, to which I belong, has a friendly and close relationship with this university. For example, he delivered a lecture here in 1992 on the theme of the tradition of Chinese humanism. Dr. Ikeda has also published a dialogue with Dr. Henry Lau Zhongyi, a professor emeritus at this very university. I have read the book and have been deeply impressed by Dr. Lau's statement that non-violence might be considered a sign of weakness, but that is not the case. The spirit of non-violence must include the spiritual strength to overcome violence. As you might know, Dr. Ikeda also founded the Soka University in Japan, which established the first educational exchange with the Chinese University of Hong Kong. That was the first of many educational exchanges by the Soka University, which is now extended to 106 universities in 44 countries. Indeed, I would like to maintain this wonderful relationship with your university. As former political party, the new Komeito was established in 1964 and pioneered a new political approach based on consensus and people, rather than confrontation and ideology. The Diet resolution concerning non-nuclear arms and scaling down of U.S. military bases on Okinawa as a product of this approach. It put our national policy of 3 nuclear-free principles on a statutory basis. The new Komeito party also dealt head-on with the issue of proper diplomatic actions, insisting that Japan adopt global peace as its goal, rather than peace limited to its own territories. Regarding the ban on indiscriminate weapons such as cluster bomb, the new Komeito party played a key role in persuading then Prime Minister Fukuda to change Japan's stance on the treaty. Accordingly, the commitment of the new Komeito to peace is well known in Japan, including its commitment to the total abolition of nuclear weapons. Now, I would like to move on to my main topic. As President Lau introduced it, monumental event in the history of nuclear weapon abolition took place last month. The United Nations Security Council Summit on Nuclear Disarmament, chaired by U.S. President Barack Obama. The 14 heads of state, including 5 nuclear weapon states under NPT, unanimously approved Resolution 1887. This resolution covers specific 29 items. Most of them cover nuclear proliferation, but one of the most significant in my view is Item 9, which states, because the statement by each of the 5 nuclear weapon states noted by Resolution 984, passed in 1995, in which they give security assurances against the use of nuclear weapons to non-nuclear weapon state parties to the NPT, and affirms that such security assurances strengthen the nuclear non-proliferation regime. This is referred to as negative security assurance. The final report, published by the 2000 NPT Review Conference, recognized the meaning in making negative security assurance legally binding and requested deliberation of this matter in 2005. However, the 2005 NPT Review Conference itself was a failure. Keeping these consequences in mind, this could be another attempt to make negative security assurance legally binding. A remarkable statement was made on the topic in the summit by President Hu Jintao of China. His statement covers the following 3 points. The first was to abandon the nuclear deterrence policy based on first use of nuclear weapons. The second was unequivocal commitment to conditionally not use or threaten to use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon states or nuclear weapon-free zones, and conclude a legally binding international instrument to this end. The third was for nuclear weapon states to negotiate a treaty on no first use of nuclear weapons against one another in the meantime. These are very concrete and comprehensive proposals for a nuclear weapons-free world. The first point is particularly significant in that it gives a theoretical basis to a nuclear weapons-free world by an abandonment of the nuclear deterrence policy. However, the decision on whether to take the nuclear deterrence policy is left to the 5 nuclear weapon states. On the other hand, nuclear weapon-free zones were established through the initiative of non-nuclear weapon states. In any case, these statements by President Hu Jintao deserve much praise for referring to a legally binding international instrument or treaty, especially when considering that UN Security Council Resolution 984 on negative security assurance has not been sufficient to hold back new nuclear development in actual international society. In fact, some Japanese people were frightened by the scale of event shown in news report on the military parade at the ceremonies for the 60th anniversary of the foundation of the People's Republic of China, which included the first display of ICBMs. However, I believe these statements by President Hu Jintao deliver a message to Japanese citizens that China is one of the most peaceful countries in the world with a strong commitment toward a nuclear weapons-free world. Bearing these resolutions and statements in mind, I have found a new movement toward a nuclear weapons-free world. The first one is national security without nuclear deterrence. Underlining recent Highland discussion on the nuclear weapons-free world is a common consensus that the demerit of risk of terrorists obtaining nuclear weapons outweighs merit from peace through nuclear deterrence. Furthermore, as the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the suffering of their victims proves, nuclear weapons are too devastating to use from the standpoint of keeping the world peace. In order to realize national security without nuclear deterrence, the most effective and essential method is establishing an international moral consensus that nuclear weapons are evil. This is the second movement. As you may remember, the Ottawa process and the Oslo process, led by the citizens of the world, resulted in the banning of 2 indiscriminate weapon systems, that is, landmines and cluster bomb. The international moral consensus that indiscriminate weapon systems are evil was a key factor in achieving these notable treaties. The third one, which was also addressed by President Hu Jintao in his statement, is the creation of a nuclear weapon-free zone treaty by non-nuclear weapon states. This is a means for non-nuclear weapon states to take the initiative for nuclear disarmament. The NWFT requires the nuclear weapon states to pledge against using nuclear weapons by ratification of protocol, which gives it legally binding force. Countries in 6 regions have already agreed to have signed or ratified this treaty. The region being first, Central and South America, second, the South Pacific, including Australia and New Zealand, third, Africa, fourth, Southeast Asia, fifth, Central Asia, and sixth, the Antarctic. This effectively places nearly all of the southern hemisphere into NWFT. This expansion of the NWFT places restraint on the nuclear weapons possessing countries, which reduces the merit of possessing nuclear weapons, and thus becomes a reckoning force toward the realization of a global nuclear abolition. The last movement toward the nuclear weapons-free world is the increasing and active role of non-nuclear weapon states and the citizens of the world toward this goal. This is understandable if you consider the second and third movement in this slide. Riding on this new movement, we can propel ourselves through a new process called the New Hiroshima-Nagasaki process. As I stated earlier, the Ottawa process and the Oslo process were led by the citizens of the world and resulted in the burning of landmines and cluster bombs. Campaign led by the citizens of the world against nuclear weapons have just started. The Hiroshima-Nagasaki Protocol, introduced to me by Mr. Tadatoshi Akiba, mayor of Hiroshima City, was announced by the Mayors for Peace at the meeting of the NPT Preparatory Committee in Geneva during the April of last year. As of October 2009, now, the Mayor for Peace consists of mayors from 3,147 cities worldwide. 7 cities in China are members. That is Beijing, Dalian, Canton, Chongqing, Fuzhou, Hangzhou, Wuhan. The Mayor for Peace seeks the adoption of the protocol at the next year's NPT Review Conference. I give high praise to this protocol in that, first, it defines a series of processes up to the elimination of nuclear weapons. Second, it sets a target year for achieving the elimination of nuclear weapons before or by 2020. And third, it takes a gradual approach that does not require the simultaneous participation of all 5 nuclear weapon states. Another citizen-led campaign is the Hiroshima-Nagasaki Declaration, headed by 17 Nobel Prize laureates. This was issued in May 2009 and initiated by Northern Ireland peace activist Mary Maguire, a 1976 Nobel Peace Prize co-recipient. The declaration calls on the citizens of the world to grasp the peril of inaction and summon the political will to advance toward nuclear disarmament and abolition. It deserves praise for reaffirming that the citizens of the world can exercise their initiative in disarmament negotiations rather than countries that own indiscriminate weapons systems. This is also seen the Ottawa process and Oslo process. The third citizen-led campaign is the Hiroshima-Nagasaki process. Proposed in July 2008 General Conference of the International Peace Research Association, held in the Belgian city of Louvain. The proposal was made by Professor Katsuya Kodama, son of a victim of nuclear bombing. The proposal is well thought out and comprehensive, simultaneously deploying steps for chronological progress from the Convention to control nuclear use threat to Convention for eliminating nuclear weapons along with Convention for expanding the area covered by a global nuclear weapon-free zone. On October 3rd of last year, the new Komeito Party acting chief representative Toshiko Hamayoshi became the first person to use the phrase Hiroshima-Nagasaki process in the Diet Japan. She used the phrase during an extraordinary session of the House of Councillors, calling on the government to advocate and promote the Nuclear Weapons Convention. The Hiroshima-Nagasaki Protocol, Hiroshima-Nagasaki Declaration, and Hiroshima-Nagasaki Process all use the name Hiroshima-Nagasaki, as it is no longer an emotionally charged phrase symbolizing the sites of atomic bombing, just as the name Ottawa and Oslo became more than the place and name, coming to symbolize the campaign to ban landmine and cluster bomb. The name Hiroshima-Nagasaki has come to represent realistic and specific campaign for eliminating nuclear weapons. The campaign came in a variety of forms, including protocols, declarations, and processes, with no need to lump them up into a single format. Each initiative can be loosely associated with each other, following different paths to reach the goal of a nuclear weapons-free world. Hiroshima Nagasaki can be the slogan for the mountaineers of the world who would chant the phrase as they keep their climbing pace at the southern sharp slope, or to invigorate themselves at the sight of steep cliff. I would like to move on to the collective characteristics of their new Hiroshima-Nagasaki process. The new Hiroshima-Nagasaki process attaches a great importance to abandonment of a nuclear deterrence policy based on first use of nuclear weapons. This is nuclear disarmament that enhances national security rather than disarmament that goes against the national security policy. It is meaningless to maintain the age-old confrontational approach between activists demanding disarmament and nuclear arms elimination and the government who cannot shift its focus from the nuclear deterrence. We should adopt the perspective that scaling back the role of nuclear weapons across the world would enhance the security of the world. The goal we work toward must be realistic in order to mobilize not only anti-nuclear activists, but also as many citizens of the world as possible. A philosophy of nuclear arms elimination that conflict with national security would no longer provide motivation for a continuous and universal campaign. The second characteristic is a consistent and continuous process focusing on what must be done to eliminate nuclear arms as opposite to starting from what can be done. In other words, no first use before total elimination. President Obama's speech in Prague had a major impact on the world because it was not based on the concept of starting from what can be done, but expressed his commitment to the goal of nuclear arms elimination. For this, he indeed deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. It is important to examine what our generation must do to reach the goal. The third characteristic is nuclear disarmament, which focuses on establishing an international moral consensus among the citizens of the world that nuclear weapons are evil, rather than conventional nuclear disarmament, pushed by diplomatic authorities which emphasizes verification. Some diplomats insist on verification or inspection, but we must leave such dated ways of thinking behind. This is not acceptable to bureaucrats who are obsessed with the doctrine of precedent. Therefore, what we need now are political decisions made by politicians in tandem with the citizens of the world. The fourth is that the Hiroshima-Nagasaki Declaration and Hiroshima-Nagasaki process are highlighting the move toward accelerating the process of nuclear arm elimination by both countries without nuclear weapons and the citizens of the world. This is exactly how they won the ban on landmine and cluster bomb, by acting of their own accord, rather than leaving the negotiation up to the government of the nuclear weapon states. The countries that signed the Oslo Treaty may not own even 10% of cluster bombs around the world. Yet, turning the cause into an international treaty will accelerate the negotiations among the countries that own the remaining 90%. This is why the New Komeito Party places emphasis on the unity of the people around the world, including them in countries without nuclear weapons. Now, I will move on to the last slide, possible immediate actions. I would like to propose the following as for options for immediate actions. First, organize a citizens' conference on new Hiroshima-Nagasaki process at the same time as International Conference on Nuclear Disarmament the Japanese government has scheduled for early next year. Second, adopt a declaration at this conference calling the countries that try to withdraw from NPT to own nuclear weapons, the enemies of mankind. Third, organize a campaign to have no first-use declaration adopted onto a legally binding protocol among NPT signatories at the NPT Review Conference next May as a step toward eliminating nuclear weapons. There have always been arguments about the advantages for countries like India, Pakistan, Israel in signing NPT. There are also debates on what sanctions should be applied to countries like the DPRK that try to abandon the treaty. On this point, I'd like to suggest that NPT signatories declare their commitment to no first use of nuclear weapons against any other signatories and turn the framework into a legally binding protocol next. This is in line with statement by President Hu Jintao and would pave the way toward nuclear weapons-free world, where the 5 nuclear powers under NPT P5 are not only forbidden from using nuclear weapons on non-nuclear countries, but also first use among P5 nations. Fourth, develop a common consensus among the U.S. allies of Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the NATO nations on the no first use principle that does not conflict with U.S. extended deterrence, such as the nuclear umbrella. If Japan is to promote a nuclear weapons-free world, it is unthinkable that only Japan should stay under the nuclear umbrella. It is time for Japan to make a political decision. There seems to be a misunderstanding worldwide on the relationship between the nuclear umbrella and the no first use policy. They seem to think nuclear weapons should be available as a means of extended deterrence, even against conventional strikes on non-nuclear weapon states. However, the term extended deterrence is the opposite of basic deterrence, meaning deterring strikes on one's own country. Therefore, extended deterrence means exercise deterrence capacity on allied countries, taking a strike on them as a strike on one's own country. In light of the situation, I propose development of a common consensus on the no first use principle that does not conflict with extended deterrence among the U.S. allies of Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the NATO nations. This means expecting the U.S. to counter conventional strikes on allies with conventional strikes, and nuclear strikes on allies with nuclear strikes. This kind of debate on extended deterrence among the U.S. allies must be explored before we can give our opinions on the DPRK-China Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance signed by Chinese Premier Chou En-lai and North Korean President Kim Il-sung in July 1961. It stipulates that China will use its full military might to assist North Korea if it is invaded or involved in a military conflict. Personally, I wish to seek the possibility of unique diplomatic negotiation by the Japanese government toward guiding the United States into declaring no first use of nuclear weapons on North Korea and prompting China to make the DPRK's abandoning nuclear weapons and returning to NPT a condition for their bilateral treaty of friendship, cooperation, and mutual assistance with North Korea. I firmly believe these to be a stepping stones on the road to a nuclear weapons-free world. As United States President Obama has said, this goal may not be reached within our lifetime. Even if this is the case, achieving the intermediate goal will allow us to pass the torch to future generations. It will allow us to the rest assured that the final goal has been brought within reach, like the serenity felt watching a sunset after the hard day's work. Finally, my closing remarks. On the wall of my office, I have a calligraphy scroll of a Chinese poem by Chan Tsai, a present from Professor Lau. It was written by his grandfather, Professor Yu Yoren. It reads in Japanese, 天地のために心を立て、生民のために命を立て、王政のために哲学を継ぎ、万世のために太平を開かん。In English, open your heart for good of humanity and good of heaven and earth. Put your life on the life for the living. Learning must be passed down through the generation for your ancestors. Bring about peace for all eternity. It is not the departure point for the politicians of the world. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Hamada, for your most inspiring lecture. Mr. Hamada has kindly agreed to take a few questions from the audience. Now, may I invite Professor Lawrence Lau to conduct the question and answer session, please.
Thank you very much. Let us give Mr. Hamada another big hand for a very stimulating lecture. Questions from the floor, please identify yourself, and there should be a mic. Professor Yang, please.
Mr. Hamada, I'm deeply impressed by your talk and by your efforts toward creating a nuclear weapons-free world, which would be important for all of us and our children and our grandchildren. May I be allowed to go back 60-some years to the years 1945 and 46. inspired by Niels Bohr, Oppenheimer and Lilienthal had written a famous proposal for the United Nations to adopt. It was a very ambitious plan which did not go through, mostly because Mr. Baruch, who was chosen by President Truman to present the plan to the United Nations, completely changed the real content or the real intention of that very important proposal. What was the proposal? The proposal was that all nations yield partly their sovereignty concerning atomic energy matters. I was a graduate student at that time in the United States, and I well knew the popular discussion of that proposal. In retrospect, it is clear that Mr. Baruch or no Mr. Baruch, that plan could not go at that time. Because at that time there were two great powers in the world, and there's no way that any accommodation could be worked out between the United States and Stalin about such a plan. However, the world has greatly changed. Today we have 5 nuclear powers with perhaps 3 more candidate powers. But the most important thing is that today it is recognized that this is a multilateral world. And I would think that most of the people in these nuclear power nations and quasi-nuclear power nations are aware of the advantages of an international agreement to create a nuclear weapons-free world, that there are enough support for such an idea. That presumably is the reason for your efforts, the basic reason for your efforts. I want to ask you whether you think that in fact my judgment is correct, that such a comprehensive plan to ask all nations to yield part of their sovereignty for the common good is more likely to go today than it was in 1945 and 46.
Thank you very much for questioning, Professor. A very difficult question. But turning back to the history in 1945, 1946, at the time of the Cold War, a very difficult situation. But as you stated, the situation is gradually changed, and particularly in 1989, the wall of Berlin collapsed, and Secretary Gorbachev visited China, and restrained among P5 countries, nuclear weapon possessing countries, decreasing. So this is a chance. Indeed, it is very difficult to prophesy. The movement is very prophesy the possibility of this new movement. But what we have to do is to utilize this chance. In this sense, we attach great importance on the unity of the people, not leave the negotiation of the government of the countries. So, I'm not sure this is the answer of your question or not, but I would like to make a new movement, learning from the history from the 1945 and 1946. I'm not sure this is answering of your question or not.
Mr. Hamada, I'm Stephen Lee, the student of CUHK and also alumni of CUHK. I think there's a sad history or unfortunate history that the world two cities that were damaged by nuclear weapons were all in Japan. I was in Japan this August, and I have I've watched some NHK documentary, and one of them say that in fact before the two cities were bombed, Japan also investigated some nuclear technologies, and they sent people to Niigata to collect the minerals and something. I want you to confirm whether this news was true. And in fact, I have two questions in mind. The first one is, we talk about the nuclear weapon-free proposal, right? And is nuclear weapon is the most strongest weapon on earth? Or if some country already have some standby weapon that is more stronger than the nuclear weapon, that even though you ban this nuclear weapon, they can still use some other weapons that can create more serious damages. And the second thing is, if you say we are allowed to do some more nuclear technologies investigations, and we just stop the military purpose, but on one day you find some excuse that you want to use it, I think you can make use of the non-military purpose technologies into the military purpose. And you know, we still have the documentaries, we still have some documents left, we still have some experts left, and if, like America, if they want to do something, they can collect people, they can collect the materials, they can collect the documentaries, so they can easily turn all those non-weapon use materials for weapon purpose. So how do you think about this?
Thank you very much for questioning. The first question is about the NHK documentary.
Yeah.
And what you mentioned in the documentary about in the Niigata.
In fact, that is an hour, 60 minutes documentary, and it states that it was almost undisclosed secret. But nowadays, they already get these documents from the government. And they said that even the research center was located in Tokyo. I don't know whether you have read this, you have watched this program or not. Yeah, that was from NHK, and they have a whole series talking about the World War II history.
Unfortunately, I didn't watch that documentary, but probably if I understand your question correctly, in the wartime, Japan had a research on the nuclear bombing, but at this stage, although Japan has a capability to produce nuclear weapons, but all are very forbidden. There's no evidence in the Japan to produce such kind of research. So there is no activities in the nuclear bomb in the military concerned. But atomic research in the peaceful use to generate electric power, such kind of the research undertaking a lot of the research institute in Japan?
Please.
I am KSO. I am an alumni of this university. Now, I think Japan is the most qualified country to, move forward, the topic you talk about, because of the atomic bomb being, thrown into Japan. My question is that, when I look at the military build-up in Japan, for the past few years, I'm a little bit scared, not talking about atomic bombs, okay, not talking about, I'm talking about conventional build-up. When we look at the Navy build-up, is
Navy.
the Navy,
Navy.
the warship build-up in Japan is tremendous. They have recently launched, two something like new aircraft carrier, that sort of things. So at the same time, you talk about, abandoned, nuclear, bomb, that sort of thing. But at the same time, Japan built up a very strong, military, forces in Asia. Now, it's a little bit contradiction, to the topic you talk about. When we get back to the old days, say that we get rid of all the nuclear bombs, Now, Japan will be a very strong, country in terms of the military capacity.
Not
in
so
the world.
strong as compared with China.
Yeah, from my judgment, I think it's very strong, So it's a little bit, worry about people. You're talking about get rid of the nuclear bomb, but at the same time, you build up a very strong, conventional weapons. That is my concern.
Yes. Thank you very much for questioning. Today, I talk about nuclear disarmament, but disarmament on the general speaking is very, very important. Indeed, Japan had a defense force, but these activities are very strained under the constitution. Japanese constitution is very unique. We abandon military invasion, the military activities in dissolving the conflict between Japan and the other countries. In this sense, defense is used as defense purpose, not invade. So, please feel relieved. Not Japanese government not use defense force into your country.
Hopefully.
Please, definitely.
Okay. We have time for one more question, but Professor Yang has the floor.
I've been to Japan many, many times. As a physicist, I know many, many Japanese physicists. So I know that the Japanese, like people everywhere, have a great variety of people taking very different political attitudes. There's no doubt that there are people in Japan who have not learned the lesson of the past. That is to be expected. And I would say that there are also people in China who are very much taking aggressive views about the world. I find it very impressive that you and your party are making far-sighted and big efforts in order to make the world safer for the future. I think that is an effort that all of the people in the world should applaud and support.
Thank you very much.
I think on that note, maybe we would thank Mr. Mada once again for a most stimulating lecture.
Thank you very much.